Let's edit this landscape photo and turn it into this. And along the way, I'll share some little known hints and tips to really take your photos to the next level. And as a bonus at the end, I want to share with you how I take this low resolution, noisy file and transform it into an upscaled, noise-free, flawless file. All right, let's get into it. Back on a wedding shoot in 2011, I grabbed 2 frames of this beautiful sunset, neither of which are particularly well exposed, but it was so high contrast that there was no perfect exposure that was going to get all of that dynamic range into one shot. So I've got a couple of choices. I could either create an HDR combining these two, or just see if I can't caress a bit of detail out of this particular photo. And that's what I'm going to go with. We're just going to see whether I can't liberate a bit of information from this. You can see that by boosting the exposure by +5, we are actually able to see into all of that shadow detail. Admittedly, it's ridiculously noisy, but that information is kind of there. Conversely, if I take the exposure down to the left, you can see that we can bring back a lot of information in the highlights as well. And that's testament to just how good Nikon's sensors were even back in 2011. But let's see what we can do to actually work this file. I'm just going to boost the exposure a little bit and then just bring those highlights down and even bring the whites down as well, just so that I'm keeping that information in the highlight component of the clouds there. This is one of those rare photos where I'm not really interested in recovering all of that shadow detail. What I would prefer is to keep this as more of a silhouetted kind of shot. So I'm just going to boost the shadows just a little bit. So we do have some information there, but I really want to keep this one kind of dark and moody. In terms of the color balance, ultimately, I want to make this a much warmer shot. So I'm going to just give this a Kickstarter by boosting the temperature just a little bit. And now I just want to bring your attention to what I'm going to do next. It's always good to have a game plan before you actually begin your edit, because if we can assess our photo, look at what actually needs to change in the photo, then we can be purposeful about the tools that we're applying. So the first thing that I notice is that we actually have a kind of face going on in the sky here, and I find that really distracting. I love where the smile is through here. However, these little pockets of light here kind of look like eyes to me, and that is so distracting. So we either have the option to crop that out and run straight across there. However, I do feel like we need a little bit more of that sky. So I think I'm going to solve that problem with the clone tool. And talking about the clone tool, we've got these little hoodlums here, which I think should probably disappear. There's also this guy on the steps, but we might leave him in just for a little bit of scale in the photo. And when you do start cloning, you start to notice other things that are distracting as well. So there's this little element of the pier here that just kind of catches my eye through the bridge there. So I'd also like to remove that. And talking about catching your eye, the extremely detailed water that we have going on here, it's just really grabbing my attention. And so if we can soften that off slightly, I'm certainly going to do that. One thing I like to do before I start my edits is to identify what the hero of the photo is. And for me, I would argue that the hero of this photo is the light beaming through, pouring through the clouds here. It's not as pronounced as I would like it to be. And so I'm wondering whether we can't enhance that effect through there as well. So I'll show you how we do all of these things as we progress the edit. So for now, let's reset that develop tool, and then we can just throw that in the bin. And let's kick off our edit by getting rid of these eyeballs in the cloud. So I'm going to come down to the clone tool here, which is the very last tool. And with a strength of 100 and a relatively large brush, what I'm going to do is just click a sample point by holding the Alt key and then just choosing somewhere that I'm going to borrow pixels from. And then I'm going to paint them over the area where the eye is. And we can do the same over the other side. It's good to choose a different sample point so that you're not replicating the pattern in the photo. And what I like to do is just break things up a little bit by choosing my strength at about half of what it was and coming in with a slightly smaller brush, choosing a different sample point, and then just kind of feathering around the edge of where I would have painted that in. And it just breaks up the fact that we've borrowed identical pixels and gives us a little bit of variation through that area. Let's toggle the before and after to see what we've done before and after, and we've got rid of those distractions in the sky. Let's zoom into this log on the pier here, and I'm going to get rid of that by sampling the structure of the bridge here, and I'm going to borrow this and paint it over this area. If I misalign where I start painting from, sorry, I've still got my strength at 50, so let's crank that back up to 100. you can see that this is not going to help us whatsoever. I've painted in the wrong place. So the key to cloning is to make sure that you're aligning the geometry of where you're choosing your source and what you want to paint over. And so I know by clicking on this top edge here, if I start painting on the top edge, clicking there and painting, I know that it's going to align perfectly. And that way it's a really simple way to use that clone tool and paint that area out. We could be more refined around there, but no one's going to notice that. And for the sake of the video, I'll just press on. I'm going to do the same here for getting rid of these guys. I'm going to borrow the pattern from up the top here and follow my mouse down, and I'm going to click and start painting and borrowing from that pattern zone so that we're basically following on those vertical stripes all the way down over those guys. And now I'm going to remove the softness from the brush, bring the brush down to a similar width to what we've got going on in between those boards. And now I can just paint in, and I'm doing this in a bit of a rough and ready way just to make sure this is done in a more speedy way for the video. And you'll notice if I don't resample and come down here and try and paint the legs away, I'm going to start borrowing from this timber framing here, which isn't what I want. So I'm just going to press Ctrl Z on my keyboard to undo that. And I'm going to select a new sample point. So I'll hold the Alt key, I get this little crosshair, and I'm going to say borrow from here. So I've clicked now. And now I come down and nothing happens until I click. And now when I start painting, I'm borrowing from that new source. And so I can just come in here and paint out anything that I don't want in the background. Something like that will be fine for the purposes of this photo. Before and after, here they are, and now they're gone. Before we go any further, I'm going to do a crop on this photo because I'm not enjoying in the top left this little bit of blue sky. It's not adding anything to the photo and it's a bit of a visual distraction. And so I'm going to bring that crop down. And for this one, I think rather than keeping the aspect ratio the same, I might change this to something more like a 4:5, more of an Instagram crop. Something like that looks pretty good. We've got our main interest of the bright bit of the sky on the top third. We've got the bridge on the bottom third. And then on the vertical left third, we've got the building itself. So in terms of adhering to the rule of thirds, that's a pretty good crop. Okay, let's soften this very texturized water down at the bottom here. So there's several ways we could do this, and I'll show you a few different techniques. The first one that I'm going to use is to grab the structure AI tool, which usually adds structure if we crank that up. But in fact, what I want is to do the opposite of that and actually destroy the structure. So I'm going to take that all the way to the -100. And of course, by boosting that effect, we can take that even further. Now, we don't want to make our whole photo look like a painting, and we also don't want to do that completely over the water either. However, with a bit of judicious masking, we should be able to introduce just a little bit of this. So I'll put the softness to 100, so we have a nice soft edge, have the strength, I don't know, somewhere around 1/3, and now I can just start painting that in, and I'll do more strokes towards the bottom of the photo so that we intensify the effect the further it gets from the bridge. I nearly forgot to say, those of you supporting the channel with members plus download option, firstly, thank you very much. This file will be available for you in our shared Dropbox folders. And for this particular video, if that's not you, but you would like to follow along, just go to the link in the description of the video, click on that, put in your email address, and I will send you this file so you can join in with the edit as well. Another option we've got is to use the blur tool, and we could use any one of the Gaussian, motion, or tilt shift blurs. They're all good options. And what I'll do, I'll show you a couple of them. Here we go. So this is motion. If I put the amount to 100, we're blurring the photo in a manner which looks as if we've kind of whipped the camera around side to side. But we can also borrow this effect to make it look as if the water's moving as well. And we could try and match the angle of the blur to the angle in which the water is actually moving. So that is one option. So again, we could use the mask, come to a brush, and again, just start to paint that effect in. We don't have to go the whole hog with it. We can just build it up gently. So here's our before and our after. Another really great option for softening the water is to use the tilt shift blur. And I really like this because it has a natural gradation to it. So if I put that amount at 100 and we click the place blur center button, you can see that where we have this center component here, it stays nice and sharp. And then we have a fall off as things get increasingly blurry towards this bottom line here. So what I'm going to do is set the bottom line approximately at the bottom of the photo. And obviously we don't want to blur the sky like we have done here. Currently it's a symmetrical blur effect, but of course we're able to come into the masking option. We could grab a linear gradient, and now if we click and draw up from here, the area of the mask that is red underneath here is going to reveal the effect of the tool underneath, and we won't see any of it above. So now if I hop out of that, you can see that we have that blur only over here. But currently it doesn't look particularly good. It's far too much, it's over the top. So we're just going to come back into our mask section again. And with the brush tool in erase mode, I'm just going to take away, I don't know, about 2/3 of that effect. So I'm just going to paint over this. And now we've reduced that amount. We've softened the effect, so before and after. And if I hold the / key so we see our original and where we've got to, but you focus on the water before and after, we've just created a slight softening of that water. Let's take a look at how we can enhance those sun rays. So I don't want to do anything artificial. Of course, we could add some sun rays in, but it looks so good in camera. So we're just going to enhance what's already there. So I'll come into the Structure AI tool and I'm going to crank that amount to 100. Let's have a look before and after. Okay, what I'm looking at here is not the whole photo. I'm just keeping my eye on what's going on with the beams of light. So before and after. And if I've decided that it looks pretty good just over where the hills are, but nowhere else, that's where we come in to the Mask AI tool and we can just select mountains and see what that does for us. If I hop out of that, let's look before and after, before and after. Pretty good, but we don't need the effect over this bit of hill here. So this time let's come into Object Select AI, go into Subtract mode and see if we can't just remove that from there. There we go, nice and easy. And to be honest, I'm a much bigger fan of the Object Select AI than the original Mask AI tool, because as you could see from the mask itself, if I go to Show, it's not particularly accurate. So what I'm going to do is actually clear that, and this time we are going to use just the Object Select AI, and this is actually highlighting the mountains much more accurately. So I just need to click on the areas I want to include. We can use the brush just to add to that selection. One thing I often like to do is just go around the edge with a soft brush just to kind of feather the effect in. I do wish there was just a feathering slider in Luminar Neo for these masks, but for now that does a good enough job. Let's have a look at what we've done here. We're going to see before and after, before and after. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Not just for landscape photography, but for any photography, it's really important to help guide our viewer's eye. And for this one, what I'd like to do is really bring our attention to the center component of the frame. So if we understand that the viewer's eye will tend to go to the brightest part of the frame first, we can use that knowledge to darken down areas we don't want people to look at. So what I'm going to do is drop the exposure down and then just feather that effect in from the top. Come out of that linear gradient, select another one and feather it in from the bottom as well, just putting that over the water. And then we're going to get a lovely tapering in from that darkening effect we just created with this develop tool. So you can see that we drop that exposure down, and by controlling that with that mask, we're able to control the top and the bottom part of the frame. And for this one, something like that looks pretty good. Before and after, and now we're definitely drawn to this middle part of the frame. I want to bring just a little bit more punch to the central part of this photo, and one way that I would normally do this is to jump into the develop tool and start playing with the curve tool and just increasing contrast that way. However, I'm not going to do that this time. What I'd like to do is show you another way we can do it with the dramatic tool in Luminar Neo. So if I grab the amount slider and start cranking that up, you can see that, woo, we've added drama. But I don't really like the default settings of this tool. You can see if I push the local contrast up, it really doesn't look particularly good. And even having that set around 60, it's just too much, particularly for this photo. We start to get haloing. So I'm going to bring this amount down to 0, toggle the before and after. Okay, that's looking pretty good, but we are desaturating our photo quite a lot. So I'm just going to bring that saturation slider back up, and now I'm going to play with the brightness slider to see what that's doing for me. Okay, it's starting to accentuate the form of the jetty, but we are overexposing the sky with that. So again, I'm just going to grab a mask and then just sculpt that into an ellipse that I will rotate this way. And now I know I can put most of that effect over the bridge here and have it softly taper off into the scene. So let's come out of that mask and have a look. Here's our before and our after, before and after. Another really simple way to control where the viewer is looking is by darkening the edges of the frame, and what better way to do that than with a trusty vignette. So I'm just going to put a vignette on this one, Choose my subject. Maybe we'll pick the end of the pier here. Keeping it relatively central is not a bad idea. Before and after. Before and after might be just a little bit too heavy. Just ease that off a bit. And if you want to brighten the center of the vignette, there's a really nice unique feature about Luminar Neo's vignette tool is you can do that if you want to. I'm being really mindful of pushing the brightness in these clouds too far, so I'm not actually going to do that here. But this was our before and after. Let's add a glow to the sky here. And I'm going to do this with a tool you may not expect, unless you've got my Luminar Neo photo editing course, in which case you would have seen me do this in the past. However, what we're going to do is use Magic Light AI, which usually you might associate with adding glows to lights. So for example, we could make it look as if the light was on inside that lamp there. That's a typical use case scenario for this tool. However, we can also get a little bit more creative with it than that. So what I'm going to do is make a larger brush size. That's going to give us a more intense effect. We're going to come to add, and I'm just going to click here where the brightest part of the sky is. And now I'm going to crank the intensity up. And by playing with these sliders, we're going to be able to see if we can't emulate a bit of a glow in the sky. If I bring the beam width down, you start to see more of that starburst effect. That's not what I want. I want to go the other way and just blur them off completely. So it's almost like you can't see those beams. We can then play with the glow itself and the brightness as well. How bright do we want to take that? In terms of the number of beams, well, we don't really want the beams. So we can either take that to the 0, or if we still want that kind of effect of the beams coming out, but blur them into each other, just take it all the way to the top. If we have a little toggle of the before and after with that tool, you can see that, well, generally I like the look of what we've done. However, it's too intense, and that's where the intensity slider comes in. We can just come back to that now. We've got those sliders where we want them, and just play with this until we've just introduced a subtle amount of that effect. So let's just jump into the edit stack so that we can see our before and after. Here's the before and the after, a nice little pop of light in the sky. Of course, you don't need to have it as intense as I've said it. We can bring that down further if we think it's too much, before and after, and just go with that. Before we add our color grade, I'm just going to pop on a bit of my favorite tool, Mystical, just because it adds a really nice amount of softening. Look, here's our before and our after. Far too extreme, but we can clearly see the effect, and that's going to allow us to actually play with these sliders and set it up the way we want it. Usually I like to take that smoothness slider and push it further towards the 100, because after all, we're trying to smooth out the photo and give it a nice glow. So something like that looks pretty good, but of course the amount is too high. So I'm just going to reduce the amount and just toggle that back and forth until I find that little sweet spot where I think it looks good. Yep, that default amount of 30, before and after. Yep, let's go with that. So many great ways to color grade in Luminar Neo. I really love using moods. It's a really nice way to quickly imbue your photo with some beautiful colors. However, we don't have too much control other than just picking on a name. So for this one, I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'm going to work with the toning tool, which allows us to control the color of the shadows and the highlights. So the most important thing for me in this photo is getting the highlight color right. So what we're going to do is crank the saturation amount up so we can see clearly what color we're introducing. I'm going to grab the hue slider and I'm going to play with this and make sure I'm giving this a nice orange glow. Something like that looks pretty good to me. I like this orange color so much that I don't really want to just limit it to the highlights only. I'd also like to put it into the shadows. So of course we could match the color in the shadows. Alternatively, what we can do is grab the balance slider and push that up. And what that's going to do is just take that highlight color and let it bleed further into the darker tones in the image. So here's our before, here's our after, far too much as it is at the moment. But again, we've got the ability to either drop the amount slider so we can tease that back down, before and after, much more subtle, or alternatively, we can just bring the saturation of that introduced color down as well. I've got a couple of options there. The shadows are still looking very dark and murky, so what I'm going to do is just have a little play with this slider, bring the balance down a little bit just so that we can talk into those shadows. And you can see as I move this along, we can either go for a complementary kind of palette where we're introducing a bluey purple into the shadows and having the orange highlights. Alternatively, we can complement with it and also go for a nice warm color in the shadows as well. And I think that's what I'm going to do for this one. Here's our before and our after. And I'm just going to bring that amount down so it's not quite as intense. You would have noticed no matter how aggressively I was pushing those highlights, we weren't actually able to color the whites in the photo. You can't color white. So what do you do in that instance? Well, there is a way to make those whites change color. Let me show you. The only way to do it is with the curves tool, which we find under the develop tool here. And rather than working with the default luminance curve, which allows us to control the contrast, what we'll do is come into an actual color channel. I'm going to choose the blue color channel, which as you can see, allows us to introduce blue into the photo. But conversely, we can also take blue away. So by taking blue away, we make our photo go more yellow, as you can see through here. However, the white is still not affected. But we can get around that by, rather than trying to pull down the middle point of the curve, just grab the very top point, which talks to the brightest pixels in the photo, and you watch what happens. As I bring this down, we are changing the white pixels and making them turn yellow. We don't need to go anywhere near as aggressive as that, but I just wanted to demonstrate the point. But I am just going to drop this very top point of the blue curve down, and that's going to pull the blue away from the white pixels and leave us with more of a yellow. So here's our before and our after, and as you can see, we now have our nice orange yellow tone through the entire photo. I feel like the very darkest pixels were just a little bit too black and lifeless, and so I'm just crafting the bottom side of the curve here and lifting up the points that represent those very dark pixels. So we no longer have a pure black point, we just have some very dark tones instead. And I think that gives us a bit more mood and feeling to this image. So let's have a quick toggle of our edit where we came from and where we got to. So here's our before and here's our after. But if I zoom in to say 600%, you can see just how noisy this photo is, and also that it's relatively low resolution. Like I said, this was shot in 2011 on a 12 megapixel camera. So the question is, what do I do about low resolution, noisy photos like this so that I can optimize them and they can still hold their own with the higher standards of 2025? Well, I don't do it inside Luminar Neo, unfortunately. I love Neo as a photo editor, but in terms of those enhancement tools like Noiseless RAW, Super Sharp AI, and Upscale AI, they just don't really cut it, unfortunately. They're nice to have, but if you want optimum quality, we need to look elsewhere. And that's where Topaz comes in. I'll put a link to this in the description below. For me, it's a must-have tool. Let me show you how I use it. Okay, so we're going to export this. So I right-click, come to export, call it something appropriate. A JPEG file is absolutely fine for this. And as you can see, if we multiplied out the pixel dimensions, we have approximately a 10 megapixel file. So it'd certainly be good if we can increase that. I'm going to put the quality at 100, just hit export. And now I'll open Topaz Photo AI, double click to open up the file that we just worked on. And if we zoom into 400%, you can see that that file really is noisy, especially where we were working on the processing of those light rays. And it's very pixelated as well. So all we need to do is add some enhancements. So the main three are denoise, sharpen, and the other one that I like to use is upscale. So we'll kick things off with denoise. It's really easy to use. We have a strength slider, but usually I find that this tool is so good that you don't really need to go very heavy-handed with that whatsoever. And when you scroll around to a different part of the image, you see the original, you release, and then it calculates what it will look like with that particular tool. So if we zoom into this area here, if I release, you'll see how nicely that gets cleaned up. All of the wood, the texture down here, and that hill in the background as well, all that noise just disappears. It also has a really nice sharpening tool as well, but I'm not going to worry about that for this one. I just want to add an upscale. So I'm going to come to the upscale option, because usually with the application of an upscale, you also get a nice bit of sharpening as well. Like you can see how nice and crisp these edges all become. And the AI is smart enough to know that this is water here, so it adds water texture, and it knows there should be very little texture in the background here. But if you're not happy with the results that you're seeing in the photo, we have the ability to change that AI model. And the different AI models handle things slightly differently. I found that low resolution is quite a good option. Standard 1 is pretty good as well. The AI is so smart because where there are geometric patterns, like these vertical stripes, it maintains those. Whereas in this section here, it recognizes that this is some kind of old wood going on. And so it kind of enhances the texture that should be there as well. And once you're happy with that enhancement, all you do is just select to export the image and click save. It's that simple. I've been relying on Topaz's tools to enhance my photos for years now. Gigapixel, their upscale tool, Sharpen AI, Denoise AI, all great tools, but thankfully now they're all combined into one program, Photo AI, which I'll put a link to in the description below. If you're serious about the quality of your finished photo edit, I would strongly recommend checking out Topaz. If you enjoyed this photo editing tutorial, then I'm sure you will also enjoy this Luminar Neo complete walkthrough right there. I will see you in that video. Bye bye for now.